special guest star today, Forrest. Also, pop our cool new shirts. Bleh. We're plant boys. Bleh.
Flower power.
Flower power. I thought it might be fun to do some educational videos about things to help people understand and also to kind of let you know a bit about me. A major thing for me, more so than the gay community, is the witchcraft and pagan community, because that encompasses both my business, which is Magic by Moonshine, and also my faith, and my spiritual practices, which affect my mental health, and other things like that, which are really important. So, on the topic of my business, what I do is I give readings, and I give divination and spirit messages and things like that. I thought it might be a good idea to kind of go into that a little bit, because it is the kind of magic that most people will interact with on a surface level. You know, someone can be a not practicing witch, or whatever term you want to use for yourself. They can be completely non-practicing, and they can still interact with divination on a regular basis. I mean, the simplest form of divination that people interact with on a larger scale is astrology. But I'm no astrologer. I can barely keep track of my own signs. I have someone else for that kind of stuff. I'm an oracle. I do messages and divination and things like that, and I'm learning about different things. But the most well-known one, the most popular one to use for TV, especially Western TV as opposed to Northern or Eastern, is tarot. Nice. Big preface to this whole series that I'm going to be doing about magic. It is my experiences in magic, what I have learned about magic, and the people in the videos with me's experience. It is not a universal truth by any means, and it is not a complete comprehension at all. This is just our experiences and our influences and what we have learned and understood about it, presented to people who do not know about our experience or who don't know about it at all. There are other people to talk to about this kind of stuff, and I urge you to do so and learn more about it, because every experience is different.
It's not a blueprint, it's a map.
What I'm going to try to present, especially when talking about how to use these tools and how to understand these practices, is things that are universal, things that, you know, people can go, yeah, no, that's right, no matter what walk of life they come from, and then point out whenever I'm now moving towards my personal experience, so that it is not confused. Because the fact of the matter is, his experience with his deck is incredibly different than my experience with my deck, even though they have the same pictures. So it's very important to acknowledge that each person's journey with this is different, and each person's journey with it is going to be nuanced to that person and to the journey that they're on, because we may be on the same road, but we're not on the same path. So we're going to go into tarot a little bit today. And this is important because I'm still learning. I know some. I know enough to be, you know, good at what I do. But there's always more to learn. Tarot is not complicated or scary or, you know, vastly incomprehensible unless you want it to be. Tarot is a very big topic, and we're going to revisit this in other videos and stuff. Right now we're really just dealing with surface level reader-tarot interactions. Something you have to be careful with about in tarot is if you do not have something specific in mind, and even sometimes when you do, the cards are going to tell you what you need to know, whether you like it or not. Especially my deck. She does not care if you want to know how your finances are going to be over the next 12 months, if your fourth ex-husband is coming back to wreak havoc on your life. She's going to tell you, and she's not going to apologize for it. So there are layers to tarot, just like all things, just like onions and ogres. There's layers to it. And we're going to go over some of the surface level stuff. We're going to try and break down the walls so tarot seems a little less scary, a little less intimidating. Make it more accessible to you as a non-practitioner and as a non-diviner, oracle, whatever term you want to use. Let's get personal.
I got into tarot only recently. I went ahead and got myself a deck. This one is very interesting. It is in the style of the most well-known, the rider-waite, and it's been touched up a little bit. So the artwork, the lines are a little bit toned down and the colors brought out a little bit.
I have a long, messy history with tarot because I grew up watching Practical Magic. I watched Hocus Pocus until I literally wore out my VHS tape of it. Tarot was like a really popular thing in the media, really popular for imagery and stuff, especially Death and the Devil, which is where my interesting relationship with tarot pops up.
There he is. A good, handsome lad.
A lad. I did not get a reading for a while because it was not allowed in the house. And the first time I remember coming into contact with a tarot deck in person, my friend brought one to math class and unwrapped it next to me and offered to give me a reading. I was the first person to shuffle it. I was the first person to receive a reading from it. And a couple of fairly ominous cards popped up, including Death and the Devil, and it scared her. After she consulted her book, because most tarot decks come with a book explaining the cards and stuff, after consulting her book, she was less intimidated by it, but the spread itself was fairly intimidating.
One of the first readings that I did for myself was really scary.
When I moved away to college, a couple of my friends had tarot decks, and anytime I received a reading from someone, Death and the Devil always popped up, which is not because they were evil and terrible and so they were trying to be helpful, but they were just kind of freaking out everyone who gave me a reading because we were baby witches. We didn't know what we were doing. For the longest time, I did have my own deck, to the point where I sometimes wasn't allowed to touch other people's decks. Like, the decks didn't want me touching them, and there were times where I would go into my friend's room, and we were going to the cafeteria together, and I'd walk into my friend's room and I would stop and leave the room because their tarot deck did not want me in the room in that moment. And it's like I would press myself up against the far wall and wait for my friends to get ready before we would go together. Because the fact of the matter is, this is the only tarot deck I am ever allowed to own. Ever. I have to take good care of it because this is my tarot deck and is the only one I'm ever going to own for myself. When I started practicing, I approached someone who I trusted and who I loved a lot, and who I still do, and said, I know that you have some experience with this. We're going to be spending a lot of time together this summer. I would really appreciate it if you would teach me tarot. And I knew that he had several tarot decks, but in the moment that I asked him, he heard one of the decks call out for me. Like, from across the road, heard the deck call out for me. And it was his copy of the Rider-Waite tarot deck. He had bought it years and years ago. He had never opened it. He had never been asked to use it. He had never found anyone who needed it until it called out for me. Unfortunately, that deck went missing. He went to look for it, he went to get it for me, and he couldn't find it anywhere. But I now knew which type of deck I needed. I was actually gifted this tarot deck by a phenomenal, wonderful woman who is a force of light and kindness in our community and who has done nothing but be supportive and loving for me. And I was talking to her about my journey and my path and what I was working with, and saying I was excited to get my own deck because I was coming into a little bit of money, but I had to wait until I had the money to buy it. And she went, I'll get it for you. And she bought it for me. And she gifted it to me. And this is the only tarot deck I'm ever supposed to own. You know, it's one of those moments where things are happening for a reason. After that, I wasn't allowed to revoke the decks. My friend who had been training me had been letting me use his deck, which is a really cool zombie apocalypse themed deck. It's a really cool deck, but it was very, very strict about how it was used and when it was allowed to be used. So my training with it had been very limited and very, very forceful. You know, it was like pounded into my skull. I remember the spreads I learned with that deck because they were the only spreads I was allowed to use, and they were the deck was that demanding. It was fun. It was a very good deck, but I'm not allowed to use it. After I received my own deck, I was not allowed to touch that deck anymore, and I started giving readings with my deck. So my deck is the rider-waite-colman deck, and I find it's an important distinction to identify it as a Colman deck because for two reasons. First of all, the style itself is so popular that it has been updated and retouched and redone multiple times by other artists throughout the years. The original artist who did this deck was Pamela Coleman Smith, who was a fantastic, powerful black woman.
Powerful woman.
Powerful black woman.
Ooh, man.
And, you know, it is important to emphasize it does matter that she's black because Ryder and Way were two older white, well-known witch magicians, and they commissioned the deck and decided what was going to be on the deck, but the artist who actually did all of the work didn't get a lot of acknowledgement for what she did, and she died without a lot of acknowledgement for what she did, while the two men who commissioned it got, riches and riches and riches and riches and riches. I mean, his deck is a Rider-Waite deck, but the artist who did the cards is not Pamela Colman Smith. My deck is the version that Pamela Colman Smith designed, and so when I first received it, I dedicated it to her. I call it a Colman deck because it may have been Ryder and Way who designed it, but the artist who breathed life into it and made it was Pamela, and so it's dedicated to her. And because of that, my deck kind of has her personality, which is fun.
Personality in tarot decks is a whole subject.
Yeah, it's interesting because from what I've come to understand about decks in general, but especially my deck, is that they're a bit like a hive. There doesn't seem, from what I understand, to be a queen bee of the hive, but each card is an individual identity, has its own personality and voice, but then as a collective, the deck speaks in unison. So the deck will speak in unison at times, as many voices, or they will select a spokesperson. And I've gotten to the point where I kind of know who's talking in the deck. It's usually one of 3 cards, but then as I'm giving the reading and I'm handling each card and talking to it, it has its own independent voice and identity, especially because the meaning of the cards will change based on the reading. There are universal meanings assigned to each card based on the deck and based on the designer, but there are also universal truths to the card. That tarot is one of those things where it's like, it does not matter which deck you have, you're always going to have the same cards in a tarot deck. If the cards are different, they're oracle cards or divination cards.
Going off of like voices and things like that, a big thing to remember is you may not hear, words happen or, things like that. I often get what I can only explain as like intentions or emotions, especially when I'm just by myself. I'm fiddling around with the cards and, doing different layouts and things and asking my own questions. If I'm not listening, I'll get a lot of frustration. It's not uncommon for me to kind of ask a question, get an answer that is complex that I have to think about, and so I just ask it again, and then the deck does not like that. As far as individual cards go, especially when they're laid out in front of you, not so much like I'm holding this one right now, but when they're laid out in front, especially if you have multiple in front of you, they will talk to each other. A big part that I always remember is these images are creating a picture. Here's our lovely Empress. This artwork, they're all coming together to create an image. They're not, just like each card is not the entire deck, when you lay them out in front of you, each card is not, they're not separated. They're still unified in purpose in the message that they're trying to give you.
Yeah. I mentioned before that every tarot deck is the same, even though every tarot deck is different, and here's why. Tarot decks are structured the same. You will always have the same number of cards, and they will always have the same head of cards. So you've got 2 kinds of arcana. You've got major arcana, and you've got minor arcana. Your major arcana are your big name popularities. You've got the World. Ooh, that's bad. You've got the World, the Star. Let me see, who else? Hanged Man, very popular one. Also, like Death and the Devil, mistaken for a lot of stuff. Not his fault, but it is what it is.
This guy's been jumping out a lot at me.
Justice. Here's the Fool for you. Also often mistaken for things. The important thing to remember about the major arcana is they are not always all that they seem. The major arcana have layers and layers and layers of meaning, and the surface name that they're given is not their complete definition. So there's a set number of major arcana.
Mhm.
There's also a set number of minor arcana, which is in 4 suits. The suits can vary from deck to deck based on the style. There is, I know a version that is an angel tarot that is based around angel iconography. So you've got scrolls, feathers, swords, and something else. I think roses. I've known.
I think there's wheels in one.
Yeah, it depends on the artist and what they want to do, but there are always going to be 4 suits, and typically they correlate with something specific. In the Coleman Rider-Waite decks, the 4 suits are swords, cups, also called chalices, wands, which are also called rods or staffs or staves, and pentacles, which are also called coins, and I've known them to also be called hazards. In the deck I studied with, they were called hazards, but it was also a biohazard joke because it was zombie apocalypse, but I've heard them called hazards before. The 4 suits run from an ace all the way up to 10, and then you've got your page, which is also called a princess. You've got your knight, and you've got your queen and your king. Those 2 can vary. Your house cards will vary from deck to deck. A friend of mine has a very beautiful deck that is the father, the mother, the son, and the daughter, which are correlated to the king, the queen, and the page and the knight, because page is also called princess, knight is masculine, princess is feminine. There are layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of tarot that I'm still learning, that I've just started like kind of showing him, that doesn't come in the handy dandy little booklet that fits in your little box, because the handy dandy little booklet that fits in your little box can at times be limiting. The technique that I've developed for myself, that I have found when I've shown it to other people, including Forrest, that has worked, is when you have to use the booklet, when you're learning the cards and trying to teach yourself how to understand them before you start doing intuitive readings, which is what I do, is to read through the different words that are correlated with the card and then find the one that jumps out to you and then work with that word to try and get more meaning out of the card. Because just reading, this is what the fool means, it's not always helpful. It's hard to be specific, because even though each card means the same thing, every single reading they're going to mean something different.
A word about being specific. I've found that many times I am tempted when I am doing a reading I flip over, how I do mine is I put down 5 cards and then I read them. Right to left for me, left to right for the querent. I found that sometimes it's really easy to look at just one card and to think, okay, this is the question that they asked, how am I going to fit this into that pigeonhole? How am I going to make this fit into the context? And something to be careful of is definitely don't allow it to be too vague, because there is a direction that the cards want to go. But that will come from the spread in general, the cards talking to each other. As you go on, you'll see, you might see patterns, oh, hey, on the edges, they're both, upside down or reversed or inversed or whatever language you want to use, and maybe they're both major arcana, So being specific, while you may want that to be your goal, you may want to be able to pinpoint a date that something big is going to happen in your love life or job. Very often, they're just signs pointing down a certain path. They aren't going to tell you everything. They aren't going to be a magical key to understanding everything. They are going to provide a window to see things that you may otherwise be blind to.
There are certain things that I would like to mention in this first video about tarot that I feel are important for people who do not know tarot, who do not practice, as well as people who are just starting with tarot, who are practicing, who want to get into tarot because it's tarot. And there are certain things that I have had to learn, and I've had to learn the hard way. And it varies from deck to deck, because my other friend's deck is very compassionate. She's very patient. While my deck will say, this is stupid and you're making the wrong choices and I'm going to tell you why, her deck is more, I understand that you care deeply about this, but I need you to acknowledge that this is a bad idea, and I'll show you why. Having not interacted with his deck too much, I can't tell you what he being the deck is like, because they do have their own personalities and their own ways of communicating. But my deck is very, very strict, and she does not like coming out for meddlesome little questions, and that is how she describes them to me. Meddlesome little questions. Obviously, you can do readings on, your love life, on your finances, on work and on school and on relationships, romantic or otherwise. And those are questions that you can get answers out of tarot, and there are questions that sometimes need to be answered through tarot. But when you are living every day based on what your tarot cards are telling you and making choices based on your tarot cards, it becomes this kind of, if you're spending all of your time asking your tarot really honestly inconsequential questions that are kind of like party tricks almost, it can be degrading. Like,
I am going to unlock the secret mysteries of the metaphysical universe just to find out what I'm going to have for lunch.
There are some decks that I have met who like answering every question and being as helpful as possible to everyone in the space. It never gets tired. My deck is not that deck. If you are rude to her, if you mistreat her, if you're rude to me, or if you are, like, asking really trivial questions, the deck will pull cards specifically to mess with your head. I've had people come in and ask really vapid questions, like really very shallow, very, I'm going to prove to you that magic isn't real by doing this, and my deck has gone, okay, 10 of Swords. 10 of Swords. This is the 10 of Swords. It is exactly what it looks like. It is not happy. It is not happy. I have known my deck to do that, where she was literally so fed up with someone that she pulled cards to ruin their day. It's a matter of respect, ultimately. You need to respect the deck. You need to respect your deck, and especially other people's decks. There are times when I can't touch people's cards. Unless they're giving me a reading, I have to have permission from the deck. It doesn't matter if Forrest says it's okay. If his deck doesn't want me to, I'm not allowed to touch those cards, not any of them.
And there's I can't convince him.
Because I'm not allowed to.
They're their own...
And it's respect.
Their own creature.
One of the big rules with my tarot deck is whenever I hand her to you, or whenever you hand her back to me when shuffling, you have to do it with two hands. And you are absolutely forbidden from bending the cards. A lot of times...
I almost did that.
Yeah. Kind of like the gamblers, like where they bridge the deck and they like pour them together and then pop them back up. I'm not doing it right. Like they like do that, and then the cards all fold together like that, and then they slide together like that. It's very dramatic. It's very showmanship. It's very cool. I love to watch it. If you were to do that with my deck, full shutdown. You're no longer getting a reading. And if you go, I'm paying you for this, this is a service, you have to pull cards for me after I've already told you don't do this with my deck, and then you have the nerve to go forth and do that with my deck, she's going to pull cards that are going to ruin your day. Their ability to be aware of possible futures and possible situations that are happening, it goes both ways. Her ability to tell you this is what's coming and this is how you can react to it and do it, or you can do something different and a different reality will activate. It's like knowing the future. If you know something is going to happen, you can choose to do something different that's going to derail it. And it doesn't mean that in whatever you do to stop it is going to eventually loop back around and that's where you're going to end up anyways. If you make conscious choices to change something that you don't like, you're going to have success with it. But she will pull cards that are going to make it a minefield for you for a while. She will specifically pull things that are doom and gloom and danger and herring just to make you scared and to ruin your day. Because it's about respect. If someone has rules for their cards, respect them. Even as another witch or another practitioner, don't go, well, this is how I handle my deck, so this is how I'm going to handle yours. My deck is very serious about it. She has screamed at people before. They couldn't hear her, but she has screamed at people before for mishandling her, and I've been the one who's been on the receiving end of the backlash because I let her get into a position where she was mishandled. There was only one person alive who was allowed to bridge my deck in that manner because he earned the right to do that, because he taught me how to read her. The person who taught me to read tarot is the only person who's allowed to shuffle my deck by bending them. Anyone else who tries to do it, it's not going to be a good time. And, you know, if someone else, the person you're going to for a reading, or you have a new deck and the deck says, this is how I want to be handled, this is how you are supposed to handle me, you have to respect those choices. I know people who totally bridge their decks because their deck is really chill and doesn't care. It's a hand-me-down, so it's used to being worn and handled and stuff like that. That's fine. What's important is that you play by the rules of the deck. You have to be respectful of that, no matter where you are in Magic. This isn't just a tarot thing. If, you know, someone has an amazing wand and they say, oh, you can touch it if you like, and the wand goes, you don't listen to the human. You listen to the object, because the object has more power and knowledge than the human about how it is supposed to be used. This has been Tarot 101. Thank you for joining us. There's going to be more tarot videos. We're going to have more information on tarot and more content on it, because it is a hugely expansive topic and it's really fun to talk about and it's really easy to talk about.
It's cool.
Yeah. And, you know, we barely skimmed the surface here. I was just laying, like, really basic rules, really basic information. We're going to go deeper with this. And we're not just going to do it with tarot. We're going to do it with runes, which is going to be really fun because runes are hugely diverse. Like, we're going to do pendulum stuff. We're going to get into oracle cards at some point, and that's a never-ending topic.
So many.
We're going to go into different forms of divination beyond that, because there are so many different forms of divination unique to about it. Every culture has its own form of divination. Even like multiple tribes from the same area will have their own form of divination specific to their specific tribe. So it's a very big topic, and that's just divination. That's not getting into practical magic, material magic, oils and incense, animals, spirits, energy work. There is a never-ending field of discussion here. Personally, I don't know a lot of web series that talk about them within my field of awareness. I'm sure there is someone out there who has talked about this before. I am by no means an authority enough to teach classes. I'm just trying to get out generic knowledge out there so nobody gets hurt along the way. We're going to go deeper with all of this, and we're going to do a whole bunch more, and I really hope that you guys will come back and join us again. I'm EC, this is Forrest, and this has been the Divination Download. See you next time. Get your moonshine on.
Flower power.
Flower power.